The Arctic, its vast frozen ocean flanked by 8 nations, has long been prized by explorers, traders, Cold War militaries, and prospectors. But the region is changing. As the Arctic ice melts, who has the right to claim the region's precious natural resources? Next on Great Decisions.
In a democracy, agreement is not essential, but participation is. Join us as we discuss today's most critical global issues. Join us for Great Decisions. Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association, inspiring Americans to learn more about the world.
Funding for Great Decisions is provided by the Star Foundation. Great Decisions is produced in association with the University of Delaware.
On August 2, 2007, 2 Russian submarines carrying 6 men descended to the sea floor, 14,000 feet below the North Pole. They planted a Russian flag, a historic claim to the region and its buried resources. The U.S. and other nations bordering the Arctic are particularly concerned.
For the first time, the U.S. Coast Guard is beginning to explore what it means to have a presence up there.
The Arctic Circle is home to vast natural resources: oil, natural gas, minerals, fish, and timber. Laying claim to such treasures is the goal of every country in the region. And countries with Arctic coastlines, the U.S., Russia, Canada, Norway, and Denmark, can claim the territory within 200 miles out to sea. As Arctic ice melts, shipping lanes could open up financially lucrative new trade routes. And beneath the ice, companies are paying big money for the rights to explore and lay pipelines through these areas.
It's opened up a new part of the globe that, to this point in time, has really been impenetrable.
Because the U.S. Senate hasn't ratified the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the U.S. can't formally claim rights to the resources off Alaska's northern coast. But there's much more territory up for grabs. In 2008, the bordering countries pledged, among other things, to settle in an orderly manner, overlapping claims to the Arctic.
It's going to kind of be like the exploration of the West. In a generation, it's all going to be over.
They also discussed the potential environmental repercussions to the Arctic development, which could be severe. Rising sea levels, plant and animal extinctions, the disappearance of a truly unique ecosystem. What are the risks to the Arctic environment, and how will the race for the Arctic's treasures impact relations among surrounding countries? Race for the Arctic, coming up next on Great Decisions.
And now from our studios, here is Ralph Begleiter.
Welcome to Great Decisions. I'm Ralph Begleiter. Joining me today to discuss the race for the Arctic are Claudia McMurray, Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans, Environment, and Science at the State Department, and David Kirchman, Professor of Marine Biosciences at the University of Delaware's College of Marine and Earth Studies. Thanks to you both for being with us here today. I think a lot of people look at the Arctic and they don't see a place that's terribly rich. They kind of see it as a vast, unclaimed, unlived-in area that maybe has a few polar bears in it. Why should we be paying so much attention to the Arctic, Claudia?
Well, ever since we acquired Alaska as a state back in the early 20th century, Americans have looked at it as a very unique place, but a place that not too many people would get to, only the very intrepid explorers. But because of recent climatic events where the ice is melting and things are changing so rapidly, there's been an increased attention at what other resources might be there, whether it be oil and gas or fish or other things that would help us with our resource needs in the future. At the same time, I think most Americans would say they want to protect this very unique environment, even if we do end up exploring for natural resources.
And of course, the U.S. is only talking about part of the Arctic. I mean,
Right.
the U.S. doesn't even pretend to lay claim to the entire Arctic.
Right. It's a very small piece. If you look at the entire Arctic Circle, really Russia has the largest coastline along the Arctic Ocean.
And David, what about environmental resources there? Are we looking there for important environmental keys?
The Arctic is losing ice, and the loss of this ice is creating problems in reflecting or less reflection of heat back into space. And so it's contributing to climate change in that way. Of course, it's a great place. It always will be a great place to visit, and just spectacular scenery and the many animals and wildlife to be seen there.
Okay, so the climatic changes are both revealing new resources and causing new problems at the same time. Great Decisions talked with a number of other experts about the resources available in the region. Let's listen to see what they have to say.
The U.S. Geological Survey just published a report that estimates that 22% of the world's undiscovered but technically recoverable oil and gas resources are found in the Arctic, much of that offshore, and of that, most of it's natural gas. And so previously, the ice blocked much of its exploration, but as the hard multi-year ice melts away, it's becoming more accessible. And of course, as the price of oil remains expensive, it becomes more economically feasible to access those resources as well.
Conservative estimates suggest that 40 to 50% of the world's remaining fossil fuels are going to be found within the Arctic region. So really, if you look at it from that point of view, that's the future. And that's why there's so much attention and so much posturing going on right now.
Well, what some people in the rest of the country might not remember or acknowledge is that America is an Arctic nation. And we are an Arctic nation because of Alaska. We're your connection. And think about what this gives us as a nation. We've talked about the resource potential. It is enormous.
It's important because changes in the Arctic, particularly the melting of the ice, have opened new opportunities for oil and gas development off the northern coast of the United States, Canada, Greenland, Norway, and Russia. And they've opened up the opportunity for shipping to move from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic at perhaps a third less distance.
Let's focus for a moment on the oil and gas, the energy resources in the region. Everywhere from 25% of the undiscovered resources to, I heard, 40 to 50% there of those undiscovered resources. What does that mean? How does that compare with what we're using now or what we have now? Is that a big prize to be claimed?
I think it's a very important part of the energy mix that we currently have. Of course, because of climate change, we have a lot of focus on looking for other sources of energy that aren't fossil fuels. So there is kind of a mixed feeling about exploring for oil and gas in this area, both because it would contribute to the climate change problem, but also because this area is so fragile. I think one of the reasons why we haven't gotten to our full potential in the Arctic is because, first of all, the technology is not available to completely remove these resources in an environment that has a great deal of ice. The Arctic Council, which is a group of 8 countries that actually talks about what goes on in this area, just published an oil and gas assessment. And what they cautioned about is oil spills. There's a very real danger of oil spills occurring if resource exploration goes forward here. It's a very fragile environment, as I've already said. But some of this can be overcome with new technology and with regulation, so we're looking at all of that.
David, how much of a threat to the environment is the potential for extracting these resources?
Well, of course, it's always there. When people go into an environment, humans go into an environment to extract those resources, we're going to have an impact. And I think the problem facing the Arctic is, as Claudia mentioned, it's a very fragile environment. Temperatures will always be very cold there, regardless of global change or not. And those cold temperatures prevent biology from recovering from any insults that we throw its way. So it's a fragile environment that we have to be very careful with.
Both of you keep saying fragile environment. What do you mean by that? A small change makes a big difference, or what?
Small change makes a big difference. These are organisms that are not growing very fast, again, because of the cold temperature. Half the time of the year, it's very dark there also, so that also, of course, slows down growth. So they can't respond as quickly as we see in lower latitudes in warmer places.
And these are organisms that we need or we want to preserve?
Well, probably more of the latter that we really want to preserve. The world probably can get away with not having polar bears and reindeer, but I think it would be a much poorer place because of it.
And you, as a public official, I guess you see competing interests. I mean, there are people knocking on your door saying, let us get in there and get that natural gas. And there's somebody else saying, maybe like somebody like David saying, wait a minute, if you do that, these species might disappear.
Well, absolutely. You hear from all sides on this issue. And I think the U.S. has always, in its role as an Arctic nation and also as an environmental leader around the world, has sought to protect this area. And even if we went forward with some more human activity in that area, we would insist that the environment be protected at the same time.
Now, I know I think everybody focuses a lot on the energy resources there, but there are other things there too. Minerals there, I gather, in the Arctic as well, all kinds of them, metals and tungsten, diamonds apparently also, and the fishing resources.
Of course, there's many important fisheries in the southern part of Alaska that are really important for the people living there. There's also the indigenous people that are very much dependent on a way of life that revolves around fishing and hunting. And so some of the potential problems of oil exploration are threatening those fisheries and that way of life.
It's an important resource, and it already is for Alaska, and actually Alaska is very far ahead in putting a management plan in place for the Arctic waters around Alaska. What we've now been doing is urging other countries to do the same and to work with us. So we've already been engaged in discussions with Russia and with Canada about how we might all work together to manage these fisheries. So if indeed they become more of a resource in the future, that they will be managed in a way that the populations can be sustained for many years to come.
I think both of you would recognize that with all these goodies up there, which have been basically locked away in the ice for a long time, with the climate changing, the goodies are now available. That's going to spur competition for those resources and for, as Claudia was saying, access, merely getting up there to access those resources. We talked to some experts about the kind of competition that's underway at this moment, and let's listen and see what they had to say.
Interestingly enough, one of the issues that will appear on the radar screen is the whole issue of the ownership of the Northwest Passage. Who owns the Northwest Passage? Of course, it belongs to Canada, but the United States claim that it's international waters, so do the European Union, and Russia has indicated a very aggressive stance on occupying their part of the Arctic, and so in the next few years there's going to be a very intense debate about ownership.
Russia is the best position. It's the best position for two reasons. One, just sheer geography. It has the longest Arctic coastline, deep, long Arctic rivers, and it just happens to have the best geography as it relates to Arctic. It's also its best position in terms of infrastructure and resources. Ships already built, icebreakers, and even a worldview of focus that points towards the Arctic. I think characterizing the United States as playing catch-up might be a little too generous to the United States.
We've only got 2 icebreakers as a nation. That doesn't make sense, in my opinion. And it's not just with the icebreakers. Let's make sure that we are not only a participant, but an early participant, helping to set the stage for the rules up there so that we don't get run over, if you will, or kind of this notion that, well, nobody's really paying attention from the U.S. side, so the Canadians can just squeeze in from one side and the Russians just squeeze in from the other, and all of a sudden the United States is out of the picture.
Now, our audience couldn't see your reaction when the Canadian minister said, well, of course, the Northwest Passage belongs to Canada, right? But that really is the nub of the issue, isn't it? Everybody's going to lay claim to what they can lay claim to.
Well, that's certainly part of the bigger issue in the Arctic. I would say that the U.S. and the Canadians work very well together. As a matter of fact, we even took some research vessels out together, some icebreakers this summer, to do research on what's called the extended continental shelf of each one of our countries, which helps us actually extend our resource base. So we do work together, but the matter of the Northwest Passage is something that we've agreed to disagree on, and we're not the only country that thinks that that's an international water.
I'm not sure our audience would really necessarily know, certainly not know the details about the Northwest Passage, but why is it so valuable to have a passage, either the Northwest or there are a couple of others through the Arctic region that are potentially there too, but why would other countries be so interested in getting access to those shipping routes?
Well, for our part, certainly it would cut off a tremendous amount of time, and time costs money when you're shipping goods around the world. Either you come through the Panama Canal, you come through the Suez Canal. If things are coming from Asia, those distances are long. If you can cut it off by coming over the North Pole in some fashion, that really does make product shipment more efficient and presumably more inexpensive.
Maybe 8 days instead of 15 days to get a product from Tokyo to London or something like that?
It's been estimated that it would cut the shipping time in half, so it's not insignificant.
Okay. And David, what about from an environmental point of view? If everybody wants to get up there and find these passages and you suddenly have ships sort of going through the region much more frequently, large ships carrying large cargoes with large amounts of fuel, what difference does that make to the Arctic environment?
Well, it has the potential of having a fairly big impact, especially if there are going to be more ports of it, along that Northwest Passage that may increase the presence of people up there. The ships themselves potentially have an impact. I personally had some experience with this, and I was involved with a research cruise back a couple of years ago, and we were told not to get close to the northern coast of Alaska because of the whalers there, and the native people there wanted to go after the whales. And I've talked to those folks up there, and they really firmly believe that these whales can hear our ships, even though they're miles and miles and miles away. And we know that these types of ships have big impacts on the whaling populations. We see that already off the coast of the East Coast here in the North Atlantic, and there's a potential of further impacts on those whale populations in the Arctic.
A few moments ago, we saw a picture on the screen of a Russian vessel planting a Russian flag on a little device that was put beneath the Arctic, the waters beneath the Arctic ice. Is that how this is going to unfold, that basically the Russians are going to plant the flag and that'll be their territory, and the Canadians will claim the Northwest Passage and that's their territory? Is that how this is going to unfold?
I would say absolutely not. Actually, there's been a lot of press attention, and even you used the phrase race for the Arctic at the very beginning. And the countries involved here, at least the 5 Arctic coastal states, which includes the United States, met earlier this year in Greenland, the foreign ministers, at a very high level of all these countries. And they got together actually to show that we are working together on some of the issues that you've raised, on protecting the environment, on promoting shipping safety, search and rescue, all those things that we might need if we had more human activity. Foreign Minister Lavrov at that very meeting said there is no race for the Arctic.
The Russian foreign minister.
Yes, he actually told the press that very specifically because we all are trying to cooperate here rather than trying to divide it up.
It would be nice to think that sitting around a table, 5 or 6 or 8 nations with direct interests in the region could reach an agreement. But there are a lot of other people who have their eyes on those resources as well. You were telling me before the program about China's interest.
Yes, well, there are a number of countries that want to be able to take advantage, I think, of the resources there or the shipping routes, the fisheries. So the European Union has said that they will issue a policy later this year. The Russians, of course, have a policy coming out. But Chinese and Indian scientific researchers are very present in the Arctic now. And I imagine there will be other countries that don't have a direct relationship that will be up there also. So it's a matter of intense interest, I think, internationally.
David, from a research perspective, is access a problem, or the potential for access to the region to be a problem if it gets caught up in these kinds of political discussions?
Well, scientists generally work really well together when we're talking one-on-one, so I really don't see the kind of geopolitical disagreements, potential disagreements, affecting how scientists interact. I think the bigger problems are more practical ones. The senator from Alaska mentioned that the U.S. only has 2 icebreakers, and I think only one of them really works well. So that's the real problem.
Why is that? Why has the U.S. allowed itself to have only 1 icebreaker?
That's a good question. One answer could be we just haven't seen ourselves as an Arctic country until now, perhaps. And hopefully with this increased interest in the Arctic, we'll see the need for having more capacity to get up there and do science, and also to look after our interests up there.
Now, the way both of you are talking, you would think that the United States has these intense interests in the region, and the U.S. would be eager to jump on the case and be involved in the discussions and so on, and yet the Law of the Sea Treaty, which is out there and has been out there for quite some time, which governs at least part of the rules by which the Arctic will be divided up or adjudicated. The Law of the Sea Treaty, the United States says, oh, not us, we're not involved. Let's hear what our experts have to say about that.
Short review of what the Law of the Sea Convention covers would be security issues, sovereignty issues, and sustainable development. In addition, it also provides mechanisms for peaceful settlement of dispute.
That's why it's important, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, that the United States become a participant to the Law of the Sea Treaty so that we can be at the table.
The only way the Arctic is actually going to be exploited in a sensible, environmentally friendly way is if all the Arctic countries cooperate. And I think the Law of the Sea is one means by which they can do that. And until the United States signs on, I think that then it becomes very difficult to define how that cooperation is going to be.
Claudia, I think a lot of people who are watching might be saying, why hasn't the United States ratified that treaty?
Well, Ralph, it's been extremely disappointing, not only to President Bush, but every president before him since Ronald Reagan has pushed for this treaty to be ratified, and yet a very small minority has blocked its consideration in the Senate and blocked its ratification. We're continuing to work on this, but I think really it's going to be some time before the Senate can ratify this treaty. There are a number of reasons, and some of your previous speakers mentioned them, why it's so important. Freedom of the seas, protection of the marine environment, and most importantly for the United States, the mapping out of our extended continental shelf, which will show the underwater resources that we may have off of Alaska, in the Arctic, but also in many, many other areas around our coastlines.
One of the things we haven't even mentioned, I think, in our conversation so far is there aren't any people who live in Antarctica except scientists who work there periodically for short periods of time. In the Arctic region, though, there are people who live there, some who are indigenous to the region. What role are they going to play? David, maybe you can comment on this. Are they protecting environmental resources in the region? Are they going to have a governance role in this?
Well, they certainly are extremely interested, I think I mentioned before, in what's happening, of course, to their environment, and they are very protective of what's going on there. Whether they're going to have a role, I think some of the politicians and senators from Alaska have been very supportive of the people up in the northern regions of Alaska. So the bigger picture is perhaps less clear. I mean, they're in a minority, and there's lots of resources to be extracted from there, and perhaps their voice will be drowned out by these other people. When
we are developing our future outlook and policy for this area, we have always and continue to include the local stakeholders, the local residents in any kind of discussion about how we will handle Arctic policy in the future. So that's how we handle it. But also, I mentioned the Arctic Council earlier. This is a very unique body. It's 8 countries, but it also is all of the local populations represented at the national level who come to the meetings, and we all talk about issues together. So they do have a place where they can take the issues that have just been mentioned about impacts on health, impacts from climate change, loss of resources, all of those things that are really affecting them.
I want to end up where we started, actually. And David, I'd like to ask you, we haven't talked about, we've mentioned the climate change issue a lot, but if things change as dramatically as we've been talking about in the Arctic region over the next 20 to 50 years, what's going to happen to the climate there is going to be huge, but it could affect the rest of the world as well. How could that happen?
Yeah, that's right. I mentioned when we started off by the fact that the ice is melting in the Arctic Ocean, and also the amount of snow cover in the Arctic is also decreasing. This has global implications and big
How so?
impacts. Well, when surfaces are white, they reflect more light, and there's less heat absorbed by the Earth. As that snow and ice disappear, and thus the white goes away, it becomes dark. It absorbs that much more light, sunlight, and the Earth warms up. This is a positive feedback that's going to accelerate climate change.
Claudia McMurray, Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans, Environment, and Science at the U.S. State Department, and David Kirchman, Professor of Marine Biosciences here at the University of Delaware's College of Marine and Earth Studies. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you as well for joining us on Great Decisions. I'm Ralph Begleiter.
To learn more about topics discussed on Great Decisions, visit our website at www.greatdecisions.tv. To order a copy of the Great Decisions Briefing Book, a DVD set of this series, or join a Great Decisions discussion group in your area, contact the Foreign Policy Association. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by the Star Foundation. Great Decisions is produced in association with the University of Delaware.
Next time on Great Decisions. Of all the epic leaders of the 20th century, few were more celebrated or more despised than Fidel Castro. After nearly 50 years, Castro's bigger-than-life role on the world stage has ended. What will become of his communist revolution? Next time on Great Decisions.